it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Diab, who's going to speak to us today on the psychology of national security, refuting claims that human rights are incompatible with effective counter-terrorism measures. So a very timely subject. Robert is a lawyer in Vancouver whose experience in a range of areas, criminal, administrative, constitutional, but primarily criminal and constitutional law. And he's practiced in all levels of the courts in British Columbia. He has graduate degrees in law and interdisciplinary studies, and he's the author of a book called Guantanamo North: Terrorism and the Administration of Justice in Canada. And you can look that up online under Fernwood Publications. That's a fairly recent publication, 2008. He's also currently an adjunct instructor at the Faculty of Law at University of British Columbia, and he teaches also in the Legal Studies Department at Capilano University in North Vancouver. So with that, I won't take up any more time away from our speaker. Robert?
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to address the meeting. I will begin by maybe trying to be more specific about the subject of my talk, despite the title. Maybe a more specific way of describing what interests me here is what motivates the use of extreme measures in counterterrorism. Why do Canada, the United States, other Western nations continue to either be complicit in or directly engaged in practices like rendition, indefinite detention, or outright torture, among other things? I first became interested in the topic around the time that the Arar case was first coming to light. And I followed that story closely. As many of you know, that's really only one of many stories of rendition that have taken place around the world over the past decade. Perhaps it's the most famous case. I also followed the case of Canada's security certificate regime and the 5 cases that have taken place over the course of the decade, one that Mr. Copeland was involved in, and wrote about all these developments along with Canada's Counter-terrorism Act in the book I wrote in 2008. And I was really genuinely personally anguished by these developments, wondered why this was taking place, what direction the law was headed in, and so on. And wasn't really wasn't feeling too encouraged around 2008. But I was somewhat hopeful that with the end of the Bush administration and the coming to office of Barack Obama, I thought there might be a shift in U.S. counterterror policy, and possibly as a result, maybe a shift elsewhere throughout the West. I was initially encouraged by Obama's order to close Guantanamo and his ban on the use of coercive interrogation, which were initial early steps on his part. But I've been following his counterterror policy closely over the past year and a half. And like others who have been following it, it's been disappointing to see just how much it resembles that of the Bush administration. And I'm just going to point to 3, I think, key aspects of this policy. In April of his first year in office, Obama gave a speech at the National Archives, the building that houses the Constitution in Washington. And he said that he was talking about what they were going to do with the detainees at Guantanamo. And he said that in the case of a special few high-value detainees who they hadn't charged with an offense, but were simply too dangerous to release, they would have to be held indefinitely, and there was no plans to release them. In January of this year, the New York Times confirmed that this was still the case and pegged the number of that group at around 50. In the summer, last summer rather, perhaps even more disturbing news surfaced, but there was almost no discussion of it, that the Obama administration would remain committed to the program of extraordinary rendition, but with more oversight. That was in the New York Times, almost no discussion of it. Perhaps even more disturbing still, in January of this year, the Washington Post did a story that brought to light the fact that the Obama administration has given authorization to conduct targeted killing of its own citizens. And the most famous or the most notorious case at the moment is that of a Muslim cleric who is somewhere in Yemen at the moment. He was born in New Mexico and is linked to the killing, the shooting that took place at the base in New Mexico. So there's a shoot to kill order in that place. So you might then wonder what is Canada's role in this? Are we in a better place? Have we shifted our policy? We only need to put our minds to the cases of Omar Khadr and Abdel Razik to realize that quite late in time, Canada too remains complicit in practices that amount certainly to cruel and unusual treatment, if not to complicity in torture. Certainly in Mr. Abdel Razik's case, I think that claim can be made. So officially the situation is both governments and governments throughout the West are committed to what might be called the compatibility argument, the claim that human rights are compatible with national security. But unofficially, in practice, they're ignoring it. And so I'm left still wondering, well, why is this taking place? What motivates these practices? What is the logic in which these practices make sense to someone, given that they are continuing?